Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
We are staying with Bangladesh and also taking a slightly unconventional approach to this episode of Cut the Clutter. Unconventional in the sense that we will talk in 7 points, of which 4 are sort of the classical Cut the Clutter mode, which is I pick up the pointers and try to simplify them for you. 2 are opinion, and 1 is, in conclusion, is more like a reflection. So this is a 7-point episode of Cut the Clutter. We are staying with Bangladesh. In fact, we are also going beyond Bangladesh. All the news that's happened, Sheikh Hasina is still in Delhi. I think plans are being made for her to go elsewhere. It looks like the Americans, in any case, the Americans won't give her asylum, but it doesn't look like the UK government wants to give her asylum. So something will happen over the next 48 hours, but right now she's at the Hindon Air Base. That said, what this has done is the unraveling of her government, her regime, you can say, because by this time this was a stolen election. So her regime, but you cannot be judgmental about who rules another sovereign country. That is something I will talk about a little bit more in slightly more detail when I come to those 2 points of opinion as we go along. The unraveling of her regime in Bangladesh has completely exposed India's eastern front. For 20 years now, in fact more than 20 years, 25 years, India has had a look east policy. That look east policy needs to have the foundation of sound relationships to countries immediately to India's east, that is Bangladesh and Myanmar. The second condition is that both countries should have stability. As we talk right now, both countries are in a mess. The regimes in both countries, in one country, the regime has been defeated, completely dismantled, destroyed, and we don't know what will come in. In the other, the regime is in trouble. That is, the Myanmarese military junta is in trouble. Once again, India does not have friends there right now. In Bangladesh, India has to find new friends. There will be a lot of commentary written. See a couple of the articles that Deep Haldar has written for us. I will also share with you a link of the article that C. Rajamohan has written in the Indian Express. That's very good reading. There are lessons here that when you're dealing with another country, don't just put, it's an old cliche, putting all your eggs in one basket, but really there is a cynical aspect to diplomacy. And that cynical aspect is the good part of diplomacy, because nobody judges your diplomacy for keeping communication open on all sides, trading of IOUs from all sides, etc., etc. Some of those issues will pop up now as India looks at the situation to the east. So look at India's east. Look at the map. Look at the map of India. To the east, India has Bangladesh, where a friendly government or friendly regime is completely unraveled, discredited. The ruler has been exiled. It is the worst possible calamity. It's our largest neighbor to the east. Then we have Myanmar. I will talk about Myanmar in a little bit more detail as we go along. But Myanmar, completely unraveled now. The military junta is losing control, and we don't know what will happen there 6 months from now, or maybe even 3 months from now, and as the rains end. Then there is Nepal. Nepal is a country with which we've had an up and down relationship. In fact, since the Modi government came in, early on, they made big strides in Nepal. With Prime Minister Modi's first visit to Nepal, he was hailed as a hero. He drew big crowds, and then the relationship collapsed. You might remember that the spat with Nepal, the early spat, was over the treatment of Madhesis and political power for them, and to some extent, India got caught up in the internal politics of Nepal, maybe under the presumption that India could play a bigger role there than probably there was space available for. And India has been paying for it. in terms of India-Nepal relations since then. So those relations soured. So first of all, our first point, Bangladesh has collapsed. The regime has collapsed. We don't know what will happen with the nation. It's a big, powerful nation with a sizable military and a very large population, very large, mostly Islamic population, but also with a large Hindu minority there, Christian minority as well, but Hindu minority, which cuts into domestic politics in India. And Myanmar, the regime looks like the clock is ticking for them. That's our first point, along with the tensions that we see with Nepal, because in Nepal, a new prime minister has been sworn in. Every new prime minister in Nepal is the old prime minister, because each one, these are very, very unstable governments. They keep falling, and prime ministers are running a kind of musical chair. So Mr. Oli has become prime minister for the third time in about 9 years now. The second term, he was really hostile to India. He was so hostile that he changed the maps of Nepal. He changed the maps of Nepal and he laid claims to these territories, Limpiodhara, Lipu Lake Pass, and also Kalapani on the border with India. In fact, at the tri-junction of the border with India and China. That's also the route, one of the routes to Mansarovar. So it's a very sensitive area where the Chinese have a stake. He put that in Nepal's new map and had his parliament endorse that map. When you put something like that in your parliament, you are guaranteed a unanimous approval. So he created that mess the last time he was there. Now he's back in power. So if you look at the east, combined with Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Nepal. I am not saying Nepal is a hostile country. I am just saying that there are questions there, and that is what exposes all of India's east and the northeast now in a manner that nobody would have imagined 10 years earlier when the Modi government took over. The second point is, if you look at all of India's neighborhood, it is a perfect storm situation. Looks like everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. How do you divide our neighbors? How do we divide our neighbors? We can divide them as number one, hostile Pakistan, decidedly hostile. Bangladesh, under the new regime, whatever comes up, also in terms of public opinion, street opinion, for quite some time will remain hostile. It will need a very mature, statesmanly leadership in Bangladesh, or maybe a really modernizing general who takes over. We don't know who will take over, or who runs the government, drives the government from behind to change this mood if they want to once again convince the people of Bangladesh that India is a friend, India is not an enemy, and India is not out to play big brother with you. Until that happens, I would put Bangladesh also, after this unraveling, in the hostile category. So Pakistan on the west, Bangladesh on the east as hostile powers in our neighborhood, the two largest neighbors that we have. Then you have neighbors who are either compromised or ambivalent and who are tense with us. So Nepal has a tense relationship with us. Maldives has a very tense relationship with us because the new leader got elected there, Mohammad Moizu, on the India Out slogan. When you are such a big country in a neighborhood, your shadow becomes much too dominant for every other nation, particularly in its internal politics. If you have a relationship of hostility with the country, then forces in that country will use that hostility to drive up nationalist feelings. If you are friendly with that country, then other political forces can use that close relationship as an example to build a story of domination, Indian domination, a domination of big brother. So India always plays big time in the internal politics of every country, particularly the countries with which it does not have regular hostile relations. In fact, if you look at the politics of Pakistan, it's very quaint that in Pakistani politics, for the past 15-20 years, India has hardly featured. Even Imran Khan, when he came up with the slogan, Modi ka jo yaar hai, kaum ka gaddar hai, that was in his last election. He did not get a majority. He only got a majority. That majority was rigged for him by the army. So it doesn't work like this in Pakistan, but all other neighbors with whom India has good seasons and bad seasons. With Pakistan, India does not have a good season. With other neighbors, India has good seasons and bad seasons. So in good seasons, India's friendship is used as an example of big brotherly behavior. In bad seasons, hostility with India or tension with India is an even bigger trigger for nationalist emotions. That's what happens in India's neighborhood, and that's the kind of neighborhood we have. So first of all, hostile Pakistan and Bangladesh in that order. Bangladesh, I hope temporary, but who knows. Nepal, tense. Maldives, tense and hostile. Nepal, tense, I won't say hostile. Maldives, tense and hostile right now, to the extent that while Mohammad Muizzu came to India for Prime Minister Modi's swearing in, a bilateral visit between the two countries has not yet taken place. In fact, Mohammad Muizzu chose Turkey, a country that triggers India, right? It's almost like trolling India if you choose Turkey as your first foreign visit. So Turkey, then China, then to India for swearing in. So I would say Maldives, tense and hostile. Nepal, tense, not yet hostile. Let us see how this plays out. And then we have neighbors who are under pressure. So Sri Lanka is under pressure and compromised, right? So under pressure also, I will create two categories. Sri Lanka is under pressure and compromised. Under pressure from the Chinese and compromised because they have taken a lot of debt from the Chinese and they owe them that money, and their economy has been in a mess. Under pressure, I will say Bhutan. Bhutan is not compromised. Bhutan is not hostile. Bhutan is very friendly with India. Bhutan would rather that no friction ever develops with India. However, Bhutan's under intense pressure from China because the Chinese are a much bigger power. They've laid claims to large territories in Bhutan. I think many of these are just namka waste claims to say that we'll drop all the claims if you just let us have that little area around Doklam, etc. Right? You be reasonable, do it my way, and I'll be fine. I'll be your best friend. Now, the Chinese are offering Bhutan, offering a border agreement, right? It's not something that works for India. So Bhutan's under pressure at the same time. Bhutan has its special relationship and affection with India. And Bhutan is not delusional about getting closer to China or in believing that getting closer to China will help it. So it's not going to trade a Chinese relationship with an Indian relationship. Then the third point is the bright spark in all this commotion to India's east. Bright spark in all this commotion to India's east is actually what's happening in Pakistan. I'm not saying trouble in Pakistan is a wonderful thing. Successive Indian prime ministers have said formally that a stable and prosperous Pakistan, growing Pakistan, is in India's larger national interest. Having said that, the fact that Pakistan right now has completely broken politics. Pakistan's politics, in fact, in some ways is more broken than Bangladesh's was, because in Pakistan, the army stole an election. They stole an election. That's what happened in Bangladesh. Also, the army did not steal it. Sheikh Hasina stole it. In Pakistan, the army stole it for a bunch of parties. That is Pakistan Muslim League, Pakistan People's Party and their alliance, the Pakistan Democratic Alliance. In Pakistan, as in Bangladesh, the leading opposition party, which might have, in Pakistan, in fact, it was tipped to win the election. In Bangladesh, we don't even know if BNP was in that position. Probably it was, but you can't be sure. In Pakistan, you could be sure. And yet, Imran Khan's PTI was barred from contesting elections. In Bangladesh, Khalida Zia has been in jail. In Pakistan, Imran Khan and his key party people were also put in jail, barred from contesting. And yet in Pakistani elections, people appearing as independents, but everybody knew they were Imran Khan's people, they won the seats which look like more seats than those of any other party. So that is much more of a situation with stolen mandate and the army running the government from behind in a situation where the people don't trust it, people don't accept it. You can see it from many indicators. The most popular leader is still Imran Khan. In that situation, with the Pakistani regime and this hybrid combination lacking credibility, it doesn't look like the Pakistanis today are in a position, even if they wanted to take advantage of India's predicament to its east. Right now, let me just say that they have problems of their own. So let's leave it at that. That is in strategic terms, or in short-term strategic terms, a relief for India. So let's call it a bright spark. Then point four. Point four is big power play. The subcontinent has also always seen some big power play, but at this point, contradictions have become multiple and they crisscross each other. In Bangladesh, for example, in Bangladesh and Myanmar, India and the US have different view. In Bangladesh, the US would have wanted democratic forces, as they call them, to succeed. They did not see Sheikh Hasina as a legitimate ruler. Not only did India see Sheikh Hasina as a legitimate ruler, but Indian Election Commission also gave a certificate of legitimacy to Bangladesh elections. So that is the big difference between the Indian position in Bangladesh and American position. So there is tension between friends. Let's not call them allies. Let's say friends. Although again successive Indian prime ministers have said that this is a natural strategic alliance or partnership. That said, the Chinese also play their games in Bangladesh as they play in all our neighborhood. Bangladesh Navy's only submarine, for example, is a kilo supplied by the Chinese. And you want to see how this big power stuff plays out in our subcontinent. The Myanmarese Navy also runs a kilo, a Russian-made kilo submarine. In fact, a Soviet-made kilo submarine. From where have they got it? Not from China. It's been gifted to them by India. So this play goes on in this region. So in Myanmar as well, the American power wants to support democratic forces against the military junta. They also have their own concerns about Rohingya refugees. India does not want any Rohingya refugees coming in and does not want to give refuge to any of them, right? It also cuts into our domestic politics. Second, in Myanmar, India's sympathies so far have been with status quo, which means military junta rule. There, the Chinese are also generally on the side of the military junta. So once again, the allies have some tension between them, and the adversaries, India and China, have some areas of convergence. However, things are changing there, which I will talk about as we go along. In Pakistan, as we know, China calls Pakistan its closest ally and vice versa. And yet the Americans are unwilling to give up on Pakistan. It continues to be classified as a major non-NATO ally. Go to the NATO website, you will find that entry there. India is not there because India does not get into formal alliances, and the Quad isn't a formal security alliance. So the Americans are not giving up. So the Americans are not giving up on Pakistan. In fact, as time passes, chances are they might normalize more with Pakistan. Remember that while Pakistan stole this election at the same time that Bangladesh stole this election, or the rulers in either country, the Americans, instead of blackballing Pakistan, in Bangladesh, they announced sanctions on so many Bangladesh Awami League officials, Bangladesh army officials. In Pakistan, on the other hand, they've gone out of their ways to patronize General Asim Munir, who's been hosted in Washington and given time by the key players in Washington as well. That's where, once again, India's interest and America's, there is tension between them. There is no active contradiction. There is tension between them. But between India and China there, the usual stuff is happening. So the first 2 points we look east. Third point and fourth point, we've looked west. Third point meaning Pakistan has its own internal challenges. So right now may not be able to exploit the situation to India's east very much. And second, the intensification of multiple big power rivalries and contradictions in our immediate region. So our 4 analytical points out of the way, 2 points of opinion. One, we've seen much trolling of Bangladesh to say, Arey Baba, you are saying that Bangladesh per capita income had gone ahead of India. See what's happening there. The country is burning. This is not a situation where Indians, this is opinion, this is not a situation where we Indians should be indulging in schadenfreude. Because with all its flaws, Bangladesh was our closest friend in our neighborhood. Now you can say, oh, Bangladesh, somebody can say, Bangladesh wasn't your closest friend. Bangladeshi regime, Hasina regime was your closest friend. But is that what we want to believe in India? We should want to believe in India that Bangladesh was our best friend in the neighborhood and shall continue to be so, because governments come and governments go. And that's why this expression of schadenfreude about Bangladesh is not constructive. That is not the way a bigger neighbor, a bigger country with a larger stake in the world responds to a crisis like this. In fact, it's the best thing in India's interest. The most important thing is in India's interest would be if Bangladesh settles down quickly, there is peace on the streets and in the villages, and stability comes back and sanity comes back on the street. And the last point, and again, the last point, and again, a point of opinion, that sovereign nations have their own path. So no other nation should think that I can direct another sovereign nation's path. Think about the limitations of big powers. So people might say that, see, Modi government claims to be so powerful, but failed to influence the internal politics. Forget Nepal and Bangladesh, but even in little Maldives. When it comes to sovereign nations, it's not a question of little or large. Sovereign nations, particularly when they are democracies, they have their own strength and ability to choose their own direction. You want to see the limitations of big powers? See how long have the Americans struggled with Venezuela. Even now with Maduro's stolen election there, Americans are complaining, but they can't do very much about this. Similarly, see how the Shah of Iran fell in America. That was at the peak of American power and the peak of the Cold War, and yet the Americans could do nothing about it. The takeover by the Taliban in Afghanistan. These are the limitations that bigger powers, however big they might be, have with sovereign nations. And that is something that needs to be accepted as we go. अरे क्या है छोटा सा नेपाल, क्या समझता है अपने आप को, क्या है छोटा सा भूटान, क्या समझता है आपको? Not like that. A sovereign country is a sovereign country. That said, I told you earlier about what's happening in Myanmar. Before I let you go, I will just give you a brief idea of how mixed up the situation is there. 75 towns and 2 airports are now in control of the rebels. The rebels have set up an alliance of their own. It's quite a powerful alliance. It's very disparate. It's called Myanmar National Democratic Alliance. It's a military alliance because all these rebels have military groups. They have taken 75 cities and towns and 2 airports, and earlier this week, they made their biggest gain, and their biggest gain was the takeover of a town called Lashio. Lashio is about 200 kilometers to the east of Mandalay, as you go towards the Yunnan province of China. So it has China to its east and sort of Laos to its southeast, right? So this cuts straight along the Chinese border. Lashio is a large town with a population of about 1.5 lakh. It's a large town by Myanmar standards. It's also one of the 14 regional headquarters of the Myanmarese military forces. This military headquarters, regional headquarters, has been taken over by the rebels who've taken 4,000 Burmese soldiers as prisoners, including some senior officers. Some senior officers, it seems, have escaped to China as well. Read about it in more detail in a New York Times story. See the front page on your screens. I'm sharing a link with you. It's a story by Vivek Shankar in the New York Times. It's a detailed story. It also tells us of the game the Chinese are playing there. There's a quote from Jason Tower in this story, NYT story. Jason Tower from US Institute of Peace, and I will also share a link of the entire article with you so you can read it in detail. But I am reading this quote from the NYT story by Vivek Shankar. It says, and I think it's very succinct, it says, Beijing is unconcerned about furthering a broader peace. Its so-called mediation efforts center only on manipulating a subset of characters in the conflict, Myanmar's conflict, in the conflict to protect Chinese investments and weaken the military's influence, that is Myanmar's military's influence in the strategic borderlands and expand China's. In fact, a desperate Burmese military junta or Myanmar's military junta, I still have my old habits, they've reached out to Russia seeking help. So China is playing that game, pretending to mediate between the rebels and the junta so as to protect its own interests. Where does it leave India? Because India so far has not been very proactive. India would have preferred if the junta had prevailed, but everyday indication seems to be that the junta is weakening, the clock is ticking, and we don't know when something like what happened in Dhaka just now might happen there. And remember that our borders with Myanmar are most sensitive, they are most complex to guard, particularly given the terrain and also common ethnicities on both sides, common ethnicities, kinship and bonding of the tribals on both sides. That's going to be a big problem if that entire region is taken over by the rebels, which almost seems to be the situation already. So it is in that big picture that we look at India's east. There might be little respite on the west, maybe it's temporary, but on the east you see trouble, 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 trouble. In some places you write it with capital T, as in Bangladesh and Myanmar. In some places you write it with a small t.